Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Robert Jensen. He's an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. Hi, Bob.
Good morning, Sonali.
The embattled French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo has released its latest issue today, its first since the horrific attack last Wednesday by armed men at its offices, which resulted in 12 deaths. 10 of the people killed were members of the magazine's staff, including its editor, Stéphane Charbonnier. The latest cover features yet another cartoon image of the Prophet Muhammad, a move that most Muslims find highly offensive. The Prophet is shown holding a sign saying Je suis Charlie with the cryptic caption, "All is forgiving." Instead of the usual run of 60,000 copies, there will be 3 million copies of this new issue published. Many journalistic outlets around the world have republished the cover of the magazine in solidarity with its staff. And here on Uprising, we've decided not to show an image for our TV audience, even as we, of course, condemn the massacre. And those who want to know what it looks like can Google it. Bob, what do you make of this decision by the remaining magazine staff to have such a cover and by others in the media to republish it?
Well, I'd endorse the Uprising approach. You seem to be able to keep two ideas in mind. One is that, of course, the killing of journalists, the murder of anyone, is morally unacceptable, but also bigotry and racism in cartoons is unacceptable. So, you know, the cartoonists of this magazine have consistently used their platform to ridicule and express contempt for Islam. You know, these are being phrased as if they're political satire that's, getting at people in power, but it's not. It's an insult to more than 1 billion people worldwide. Some of those cartoons have been, extremely racist. So I think that republish them is the wrong move. We have to be able to keep these two ideas separate, the condemnation of the killings, and I would say the condemnation of racist journalism.
Even as the Western world celebrates the sanctity of press freedom, here in the U.S., a chapter in the long-running battle to preserve such freedom has finally ended. The U.S. Justice Department has decided not to call New York Times reporter James Risen to testify at the trial of a former CIA officer. At stake is journalists' ability to protect the secrecy of their sources. Mr. Risen, who wrote the book Pay Any Price, Greed, Power, and Endless War, would have faced prison time had he been required to testify and refused. Risen is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and has focused his career not on provoking religious fervor, but on exposing the U.S. national security state. While the pursuit of Risen began under the Bush administration, it continued and even intensified under President Obama, who, according to the Times, quote, has brought more charges in leak cases than were brought in all previous administrations combined. Well, Bob, it appears as though Attorney General Eric Holder, as one of his last acts in office, has finally done the right thing.
I think so, although we might want to ask, why is he doing the right thing? There has been an incredible outcry against forcing James Risen to testify and reveal sources. Remember, the government has been willing to put journalists in jail in the past, and I have no doubt it would have been willing to do it again if not for the really consistent critique that was leveled. And of course, as you point out, this is part of a broader critique of the Obama administration's attack on leakers and journalists. So let's applaud this, but remember that the person on trial, Sterling, is still being prosecuted, and I would say persecuted, for leaking, for engaging the act of whistleblowing, for telling the American public things we have a right to know. So this battle, in a sense, is only half won. There's still a man on trial who should not be facing that trial.
And finally, 2 police officers have been charged with murder in the case of the fatal shooting of a homeless man in Albuquerque, New Mexico last year. The 38-year-old white man named James Boyd was killed after a 4-hour standoff when police threw a flashbang grenade at him and then shot him several times. A video of the shooting from the helmet camera of one of the officers shows that Boyd was dozens of yards away from police and attempting to leave peacefully when he was fired at. After many months of public outrage and protests, District Attorney Carrie Brandenburg decided simply to bring charges rather than convene a secret grand jury, as was done in Ferguson and New York. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, early this morning, a case in the shooting death of a black man by a white officer, former police officer, was declared a mistrial after jurors apparently could not come to a decision. Well, Bob, it appears that we may be making some progress with at least charging officers in the case of James Boyd. How do you view these two stories?
Well, let's remember that in Albuquerque, there has been consistent public protest about this case and about a larger pattern of police use of force and deadly force that's unjustified. So my guess is that the district attorney didn't go to a grand jury because there was that public protest. That's a reminder that we're talking about a legal system, but politics affects the way the legal system operates. It's a reminder that grand juries are really not juries in the sense that we use that term. They're a tool of prosecutors, and anyone who's ever covered the courts and been in the system knows that prosecutors can lead grand juries pretty much anywhere they want to. In the other case where there was a mistrial, it was a horrific case. It's hard to imagine why that police officer is avoiding responsibility in this case if you read the details of it. But at least it was a jury of his peers. And so there is progress, I think, but it's progress because of the protest, and that's important for people to remember.
Well, Bob Jensen, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Sonali.
Robert Jensen is our daily Newsflash guest expert. He's an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. By the way, you can now watch Uprising on Free Speech TV, which airs on Dish Network, Channel 9415, DirecTV Channel 348, and hundreds of part-time cable affiliates, and on Roku. We'll be right back in a minute.